experiencing some healing this morning and recovered from the tag sale yesterday. Quite a lot of work went on downstairs through the last 3 days. And how many of you are tired as a result? But you're here. So the Gospel of Luke, from which we heard this morning, is particular in that it is ascribed to a physician. Luke is identified as having been a physician, and he is identified with the greatest number of healing stories, 18. Those who have counted them tell me, more than any other gospel. And he has 5 of them that are particular to his gospel, aren't repeated in the others. And one of them is the one we heard this morning about the widow from Nain who has her dead son revived and delivered back to her. And if Jesus is doing some sort of stealth mission, you know, he's not really very good at it, because to do a public healing of that sort is to make him noised abroad. And he's declared to be a great and powerful prophet because he's revived a person who died. Of course, he does it more than once. It's happened in other settings, Lazarus being most famous. So, you know, those stories come down to us, and you sort of wonder, well, there were lots of people who were suffering and dying, lots of injuries, lots of healings to be done, and for Luke to talk about 18 of them, well, that's a lot, and it sort of symbolizes something greater. It's like the tip of the iceberg. But what does it mean for us in terms of how Christianity is unfolded, how his ministry unfolded, what it all means in terms of his life, death, and resurrection? It isn't that what was unleashed is this great flood of healing around the world in terms of physical healing. People aren't regularly revived from the dead. People suffer and die. Those of great faith also know physical illness and long-standing illnesses and ultimately death. And so it isn't that Jesus' ministry, as much as it was sort of marked by these occasions, was all about that. Or if it was, it really didn't succeed in the way in which people might have thought it would, that he was coming to relieve the world of all of that. It continues to happen. I'm here with a wrapped finger, having cut myself, you know, earlier this week, and it gets my attention. I have an injury. I'm injured, and Jane was newsing it abroad in the tag sale area, and people were coming up to me and saying, "Are you all right?" Because I have my injury, this little slice on my finger. And if any of you have an injury of any sort, right, doesn't it get your attention? It's sort of like something you pay attention to. It sort of cries out to you, "Oh, I'm injured, I'm hurt." And then there are things that are really dire that we live with, that are chronic or are really life-threatening, and it gets our attention. It gets our attention. I have a friend named Tom. He's a dear man. And unknown to me until recently is that he's of Czech origin. And it came out that he had a grandparent from Czechoslovakia because we got to talking about warts.
What?
Yes, warts. And so I've been treating a wart. And that gets my attention too. I have these very terrible illnesses. I have a wart. And so I was talking about it with Tom, and he said, I had warts on my hands. I had 21 of them. Really, Tom? Yes. And then I told my grandmother about it, and she's from Czechoslovakia. And she said, well, here's what you do. You take a string, and you tie as many knots in the string as you have warts on your hands. Who's heard of this before? I'm telling you a great secret from Czechoslovakia. So he tied the string with as many knots as he had warts in his hand, and then he buried it secretly in a moist place, a place that no one knew of. And then he forgot about it. And all of the warts disappeared on both his hands. He did nothing else. And I'm like, huh, what is that? And was he saying prayers? Was it attended to by great penance? No, he just tied a string and put it in the ground and went away and forgot all about it. And his hands just cleared right up. Now, what is that about? what do we do with all these different things? What do we do with how life unfolds for us? And I think the thing that I come away with in terms of the healing stories that we heard today, the widow of Zarephath and her son, and Elijah, and then the widow of Nain, is that the common element seems to be compassion. At least that's a common element, is that people were moved by compassion. And compassion brings healing. I offer you that there's something healing about the compassionate touch. See, for my friend Tom, the compassion was of his grandmother connecting with him and his warts. And for me, Jane's compassion around my little finger. But there's compassion that we offer one another, and we do it in the prayers of the people. We do it by gathering community. We do it by worshiping together. We offer one another the compassion of our presence, and compassion to one another in our suffering, or what could be our suffering. Compassion for one another in holding one another through whatever it is that life is serving up. And that compassion, without any action, I put it to you, it's not the action necessarily. It is the compassionate heart. It is you and I being present to one another with compassion for what is our experience, which provides for healing. There is healing in that. And I think that what Jesus was showing us in the grandest of things by offering himself even to death on the cross was his compassion for the human race, God's compassion for all of us, that God would offer God's self in a compassionate presence, not to take away all of the things that unfold for all of us, but to sustain us in them, to be next to us in them, to be offering a compassionate presence. And you and I don't do this perfectly, but what is offered to us and is refined for us, if you will, by being together and by being faithful in our worship and in attending what the scriptures are saying and attending to communion and attending to the promises made at our baptism, is that we are continuing to relieve ourselves of that which would be in the way of a compassionate heart. You and I are best equipped to be present in the world as healers if we will be people freed of whatever encumbers our compassion. And I think that there's something to be said about compassion that gets mixed up with doing. You know, that sometimes for us, we think that the compassionate thing is to do something about it. And that isn't, I think, always the case. Compassion sometimes is just listening and holding and respecting what someone else is going through and offering your quiet, still support. Sometimes there just isn't anything to be done in that regard. Anything you can physically do, that you can change the circumstances. You don't have a magic wand. You and I just weren't equipped that way. But what God has equipped us to be able to offer in grace is a compassionate presence. And that, in ways that you and I cannot fully know, is effective for healing. And it's healing for the world. Through you, through me, by letting our hearts be open. And that can be really hard. But it's really important. It is what I think Jesus came to unleash in the world. You know, that flood of healing that I spoke of earlier. It isn't in the material way that we want it to be, maybe. It's in a different way. It has to do with love being released in compassion. For the world as it really is, it needs your compassion and mine. It needs God's presence. And it comes through human beings. That's what Jesus came to show us. And his compassion for the widow was evidenced in healing But it began with compassion for where she was in her circumstances. And we don't know what it can mean in terms of a life change for someone who's suffering, for someone who's grieving, for someone who is struggling with chronic illness or the end of life. Your compassionate presence, mine, being near, not expecting anything to happen in particular, just knowing that you've been called to be with, and that you feel that sense of compassion for that other who's in the circumstances that they're in. And you know that you're both powerless to change them, to change the circumstances. But that presence doesn't change the aloneness that each of us have in our circumstances, but it can change the loneliness in them. It can change the isolation. It can mediate that not only does someone else care, but that God cares, and that I am not alone on this journey. So, I look at these healing stories and I go, wow, wouldn't that be wonderful if everybody had that sort of experience? If whatever was going on for them was suddenly just wiped away, and everything was restored as I would think it should be. But I think the stories are with us for another reason. It's to show us that there's healing that's brought through compassion that is even more than. Remember Jan was talking last week, that even greater things than these will you do. Well, could it be that Jesus was talking about that? As well as other things. That you would be healers by being bearers of compassion. That something greater than a physical healing is going to take place as a result. That the world is going to be changed in terms of how it is that we are with one another. And you don't have to look very far in the newspaper or the television news items to discover how much this is really needed. In terms of people who are willing to just be with one another in sensitivity and in loving presence. Wow. So, because this is St. Augustine's, I have a sense that you all know what I'm talking about. Because I was talking with John yesterday at dinner, and it's like, wow, what is it about St. Augustine's? We were both amazed, right? There's something about St. Augustine's that it's just like you all know how to be with one another. And that if there's conflict going on here, it never comes to my door. I just understand that whatever's going on gets worked out and you are present to one another. I mean, there's something happening in the midst of this place where you just know how to be with one another. Doesn't mean that that's done. Then check that off. It's like, that's the flow of things. That's what's being worked out. Is that we learn and are refined in terms of our compassionate presence with one another. And God can do great things, has done great things with that. That's your gift. That's my gift. And it's something to be honored and treasured. And I don't know about you, but I get distracted sometimes that I'm supposed to be doing something. And I think that's a distraction sometimes. I think we need to be something. The compassionate presence of Christ in the world.